Oh boy, they look delicious, don't they? So, one of the things when people hear that I raise commodity meat goats, one of the common questions I get, not really from people on YouTube, but from just laymen, people out in the real world, is, where do you sell your goats or who eats goat? One of those two variations of the question. So, the answer to the first question is, well, I sell them on commodity markets. I sell them at auctions. I pick the auction house where I think I'm going to get the highest price, and I haul them there. And whoever gets the highest bid, that's who I sell to. So that's a pretty straightforward question. It's a commodity market. It's not, I'm not custom growing these on a contract for any smaller packer producer or anything like that. So the second question is who actually eats goats? And the primary answer here is it's mostly an ethnic market. Here in the U.S., you have various sub-Saharan African cultural identities, as well as various Muslim cultural identities, as well as various Indian cultural identities, and there's one I forget, and various Hispanic cultural identities. A lot of Mexicans, but also a lot of Colombians and Venezuelans and stuff like that too. That goat is a normal part of their diet, and when they come here, they still want to consume that goat. In the U.S., the last I looked, and these numbers vary from year to year, and they vary depending on source, because a lot of the times the data used to collect this information, it's not super reliable, in my opinion. But in the neighborhood of 80% of the goat that is consumed in the United States is imported, which may not sound like that big of a deal until you realize that the U.S. is a major agricultural exporter of everything. Everything, beef, corn, soybeans, wheat, just about everything we are a net exporter of, but we are very much a net importer of both goats and sheep. So there's a pretty significant supply gap here in the United States, and there's a variety of reasons for that. Among the non-ethnic, in other words, white people in the United States, maybe white and African Americans that have been here a few generations, goat and lamb, especially goat, but also lamb, is not a terribly common part of their diet. There's a lot of different reasons for that. One of the old stories I remember hearing when I was growing up was soldiers in World War II, particularly in the Indo-Pacific area, were fed horse meat a lot and were told it was lamb. And so when they got home, they didn't want to eat lamb anymore. And that's, there's probably some truth to that. But the real answer is a little bit more nuanced, I think, the main answer. Put yourself in the shoes of someone that lives, I could say in the desert, but really anywhere where it's not cold, where it's warm or hot temperatures out regularly, and you have a family to feed, and you need to slaughter an animal yourself for protein because there isn't a local grocery store to go to, or maybe there is, but they don't have beef there or whatever. If you slaughter an entire cow to feed your family and you don't have refrigeration, most of that cow is going to go bad before you can consume it. If you slaughter a sheep or a goat, however, you're going to be able to, your family's probably going to be able to consume that animal. Maybe you would split it with a neighbor or something like that, but you're probably going to be able to consume that animal before most of it goes bad. On the other side of the coin, so your sheep or goat is your consistent protein, your everyday protein, if you want to call it that. But there were still cows around. Most cultures outside of Hindus, I think, consume at least some beef. So when do they consume beef? Well, usually larger gatherings, family gatherings, weddings, things like that. When you have a lot of people together and you can consume all that cow, you consume that cow in one or 2 days. So therefore, that beef gets associated culturally much more strongly with kind of a luxury good, kind of a special occasion thing. And so when refrigeration came about, as well as, more industrialized processing systems and more centralized, animal protein processing systems and distribution channels and whatnot like that, if you're going to go to a restaurant and you're going to, spend a little bit more on a meal, you're going to spend a little bit more on that beef because that's kind of your luxury product. Your sheep, or especially your goat, would be considered more of an everyday staple. It'd be like going to a nice restaurant and ordering a hot dog or something like that. Like, that's not, a normal thing to do. There's other factors as well why beef is more prevalent in the United States, and a big one is going to be processing labor. You know, if you consider the slaughter weight of an average steer to be 1,000 pounds, and I'm just using nice round numbers here, and let's say the average slaughter weight of a goat is 100 pounds, it's not, but let's pretend that it is for even numbers. It takes in the neighborhood of the same amount of labor to slaughter that one beef steer as it would to slaughter and process 10, goat kids, feeder kid, or slaughter weight kids, if you got 100-pound slaughter weight kids. So that's another pretty big factor. Your labor costs, as far as processing, goes down significantly. Your labor costs go down significantly in other ways too, when it comes to beef cattle, but a big one is that slaughter cost. So your luxury protein, your beef, ends up actually being cheaper, and because the supply systems and everything get built out because of the demand for it, starts to become more your staple protein. And what was your staple protein was kind of your backup or your cheaper protein source starts to become more of a luxury item, or just an item that's just weird and you just don't eat it. And that's where a lot of the non-ethnic protein consumption market went here in the United States. There's a lot more to that I could get into, especially on the sheep side of things. I could get into talking about fiber and how, the lambs were, for a lot of producers, most producers, were just a byproduct. The fiber was the primary product, but I don't want to get into that today. This video is already going to be too long, probably. So going back to the comment on refrigeration, you have the Spanish goat breeds here in the United States, of which there are several subsets of, Siphon, Weinheimer, I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but there's different sub-breeds of Spanish goats. Well, those sub-breeds are actually the names of ranches where those goats came from. These ranches were not predominantly goat ranches. These ranches were predominantly cattle ranches, but they had the goats there because, one, they didn't have refrigeration, and two, they had families to feed. And they wanted to be able to slaughter a goat here, a goat there, to get a little bit of protein versus having to slaughter one of their cash crops, one of their actual cattle, when they weren't going to be able to consume all of that before it went bad. And I also see this firsthand, when I have lived in places in the Middle East as well, where, there's no refrigeration. If you're going to get a goat slaughtered, you need to eat it, and you need to have enough people to eat it all in one sitting. And it's much harder to get that many people together when it's an entire beef animal. Again, there's a lot of other factors that go into this, but that's just kind of a big picture overview of what the meat goat market here in the United States looks like, as well as what the consumers are and what it's driven by.